Welcome, everyone. So Nick Hafen, I'll give some more details about my background later. I will be talking about future-proofing law students. I changed the subtitle to be a little shorter than the verbose one that's in the program. Wanted to start with some old tech, some history, old history when it comes to tech. So in 1973, Xerox released the Alto computer, one of the first to use a GUI, a mouse, and a keyboard. I'm glad we switched to landscape orientation on monitors there. In 1983, MCI Mail came out. That was the first email service that could email between services. Previously, CompuServe could email CompuServe, but they couldn't cross. Interestingly, there's a couple of things here. It cost $1 to send an email. I think they should reinstitute that, frankly. It would make my inbox a little more manageable. And then at the bottom here, you could email the post office and they would print it and deliver it for you. That would also be kind of nice, although I don't know that I would use that. In 1993, we had the World Wide Web. This is Tim Berners-Lee's computer, the first web server at CERN. In 1998, Stanford filed this patent for the PageRank algorithm for one Lawrence Page, one of the founders of Google. I gave a presentation that included this slide to some librarians, and so I was telling them, if you ever think you need to pay a patent attorney, no, you can just Canva, you can make that, right? You don't need an attorney. But yeah, this is the diagram for well, there are a couple diagrams in there for PageRank. And then in November 2022, as we all know, OpenAI released ChatGPT. It grew faster than everything. So these are all technologies that changed the way we work, the way we do things. This is a national law firm. They have an office in Salt Lake City. Neuron is their like semi-automated process. And the relevant story here is I was talking to one of the more senior attorneys who works on the Neuron platform, and he was telling me how the lawyers who created it, the client will upload the information, like I need hiring documents for this person, this position, all those details. It automatically fills out the documents, but it sends them to the attorney for the attorney review and attorney markup, and then they send them to the client. The attorneys who worked on building the platform learned a lot about corporate law. A lot of it is formation work, corporate transactional work. But the attorneys who came in after that and were using the platform did not learn that, right? They didn't see the reasons that you use this provision instead of that when the client, selects this option. So that was a training problem that they are, I assume, still running into. And I think that will hopefully sound familiar. We're running into similar issues with generative AI. So I want you to think about how these technologies affected how we discover, access, understand, analyze, and use information. Just think about your own personal experience. Let me flip back to the list. Just think about like how you do things differently in your life, in your administrative work, in your substantive, legal, or academic work, in your teaching. Think about all the different ways that this changed things. And think about how that affects teaching, how we can teach law students and others, if you're a practicing attorney, how you train new people. How does it affect how we teach? How does it make it harder? How does it make it easier? I think these are important and interesting questions that we are going to talk about today. And you'll leave with all the answers. You won't have to do anything. So I kind of boiled that down to these two questions that I want to talk about today. How do we teach the technology that doesn't exist yet? If I've only been at BYU for a couple of years, but if I was there, 5, 7 years ago, how would I have taught students so that they would be ready when ChatGPT was released? How do you train students for something that doesn't exist yet, or at least doesn't exist in that state yet? And how do we teach the skills that technology does better than humans? If we think that those skills are important for building skills, building expertise for students, well, what do we do when the technology does it better, like with the Neuron platform? So my background is from legal practice. I've done bankruptcy work, corporate transactional work, AI related work. Currently the head of technology education, head of legal technology education at BYU Law School. I do a lot of technology training there. We have like a weekly lunch and learn style training series. I teach our AI course. We have a bunch of cool stuff. I'll talk more in the presentation later today about that. But I enjoy my job. I get to use a lot of cool AI tools. This is one that I found. Turns an image into ASCII art. I tried a few. This is the one that turned out the best, but it is not my favorite. My favorite was this one. It's just the confidence. It's overwhelming. Don't believe your lying eyes. There's a mustache there. All right, so the legal tech initiative, this is our mission. The first point is competence. We want a floor of competence for students. We don't want our students getting in headlines for the wrong reasons, for hallucinated cases, for redacting by highlighting the text and highlighting it in black, or I think it was some Microsoft attorneys one time printed it out, used a Sharpie, and then scanned it back in, but the light behind it meant that you could still read the text. We want to avoid that. We want them to not just avoid embarrassing headlines, but also, it makes your life better when you know how to use the technology. We don't want people updating tables of contents manually or creating tables of authorities manually or bolding every heading one by one in Microsoft Word. The second point here is excellence. I should add that first point we see is applying to all the students. The second one is more of an opt-in. There are students who are interested in technology and innovation and things like that. And we want to enable them, help them leverage their tech skills, expand those tech skills so that they can stand out, so that they can do fun and interesting things like the things that a lot of things that we've heard about, access to justice initiatives, innovation within law firms, all sorts of fun things. And then the final one I've called resilience, mostly because it has to rhyme. But that one is like what we're talking about with being adaptable to change. When the technology changes, are they getting left behind because they were just trained to a specific tool and they don't know how to generalize that to anything else? We don't want that. So we try and, this is a rule 1.1 kind of thing. Like they should be familiar generally with the benefits and risks of technology and be aware of trends and things. Bob Ambrogi has an article recently, his map on pretty closely to what I have here, but he had 3 C's. So he had capability and curiosity, which I'm thinking about just taking those. I do kind of like that framing. Okay, so thinking like a lawyer. So when I think about training students in technology, to go back to this third point, we want them to be resilient. We can't tell them everything now. They aren't going to remember even everything we do tell them, but we want them to have a base that's adaptable for the future. And it struck me that is pretty similar to what they're doing in law school classes, right? Ideally, they are learning to think like a lawyer. They're learning, and that base will allow them to adapt to different areas of law, right? Ideally. This is an Amazon list of all the books that come up when you type thinking like a lawyer. But I also thought of this book, which I'm a fan of, How Not to Be Wrong. I believe Jordan Ellenberg is a math professor. he tells this story in the it might be the introduction, it might be chapter 1. He talks about a study they did of planes in World War II. The planes would come back and they would look and see where all the bullet holes are, and then they would reinforce those parts of the plane with armor, added on armor. And armor is expensive for a plane because it's heavy. It has a big downside. And then they had a mathematician come in and point out, well, you're only looking at the planes that came back. You're not looking at the ones that didn't come back. The reason they didn't come back is because they had bullet holes in the engine, not at the front and the back. And so he talks about thinking like a mathematician. I brought these examples up to a coworker, and he said, why don't we just call it thinking? So, but that's what it is, right? That's critical thinking. That's having skills, having developed the skills and knowledge to adapt to different kinds of situations, to understand or know what questions to ask when you encounter something new, so that you don't, like the lawyer in the Avianca case in New York, that initial hallucination case, he thought ChatGPT was like a search engine. And if he was correct about that, things wouldn't have turned out the way they did, right? He didn't understand enough to even ask, is this, can I rely on this? Is this a search engine? Is it telling me things that are real, that are true? So the students don't need to understand everything that's underlying the technology. But the more that they understand, they have to have some understanding enough to issue spot, right? Just like lawyers do with legal issues. Okay. So these are some of the key frameworks that I've come up with or taken from others. So that top line there, competence, excellence, resilience, is again from the mission statement. So those are kind of the domains that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about how to train students who are future-proof. I think about deliberate practice as well, right? This is the academic literature on how we develop expertise. You need 3 things: repetition, variation, and feedback. Repetition, you just need the reps. You need to do something a lot in order to learn it well. But if you're always doing the same thing, then it's not super useful, right? You need some variation. This is, take legal research, for example. How have people develop that expertise over time? They come up against different situations, different assignments given to them by partners that require them to look at legislative history, or that require them to know something about a particular state, and eventually they just broaden their knowledge, and that is generalizable to new situations. But feedback is an important part of that, because if you are wrong and you keep practicing being wrong, then you will not, you'll continue to be wrong. So I often think about the ways that technology can enhance these parts of deliberate practice, and the ways that it can undermine them. Repetition, you can use generative AI to create test questions for yourself, to create exam questions, to get more practice with your analysis. Again, if you're going to use it to check your answers, you should be a little more careful, right? You should check with an authoritative source. But it gives you the opportunity to get a lot more repetition, a lot more practice. You're not waiting for the attorneys to give you the assignments to help you broaden your horizons. You can get a higher volume of practice. And with that, you can get variation, right? You can try different things. Like I said, it goes together with the repetition. You can test yourself in all these different areas. And feedback is kind of notoriously hard to get in law school and in law practice. Often you have one exam at the end of a semester, and all the feedback you get is a grade. You don't know what you did well, what you did poorly. I never felt like I could predict the exams that I did well on and did poorly on. There was no correlation between how I felt about it and how the grade turned out. But you can get that feedback. Again, if correctness matters, you have to make sure that you're relying on sources that you trust to be correct. But like, think about your writing. I always think like, oh, I'll finish, my article with plenty of time, and then I'll have, you know, a friend read it and send it to this attorney I know who's an expert on the subject, and they'll read it and they'll give me feedback and I'll incorporate it. Well, it doesn't always happen like that. It almost never happens like that. You finish it last minute, and you don't have time to get a lot of feedback. But with generative AI, you can get some of that feedback, right? You can, you know, help me find the passive voice in here. And that's, you know, you could do that before, it would just take longer. And so there are a lot of ways to get feedback in situations where it would otherwise be hard to come by. Recognizing desirable difficulty. One of the assignments I had early on at Kirkland and Ellis is putting together a chart of advisor fees in bankruptcy. Bankrupt companies in bankruptcy pay accountants, lawyers, consultants, all these people. And so I was supposed to make a chart of the fees that they charged in different cases so that our client could have a sense of what to expect. And that consisted of me navigating to the docket, trying to find the correct docket entry because they're sometimes phrased a little bit differently. So a lot of Control F. You know, the filters were not always very good. Then opening up the document, scrolling down, finding the right line. You know, there's a lot of like, this is how much it was during this period. This is the overall number. This is the average. So there's just a lot of numbers in there. So I got to find the right number and put it in a chart. That was difficult in that it was tedious, but it was not helpful. It didn't help me develop as an attorney. It increased my knowledge of advisor fees a little bit, right? But I quickly forgot those numbers, and I don't think there was really any lasting benefit. And it certainly was not the highest use of my time, right? But there are plenty of things that are tedious in law practice, like checking citations that are important. I shouldn't say. Some people here like that kind of thing. There's some librarians here. But a lot of people don't, which is made obvious by the headlines of people not checking their citations, right? But that's important. That's you know, going back and making sure that the case stands for the proposition that the generative AI tool has told you. That's important. That's substantive. That helps you develop your legal analysis skills. A lot of writing is desirable difficulty. I think reasonable minds can differ on whether, you know, the blank page problem is a good thing that you should not shy away from, or something that AI can help you get over. Reasonable minds can differ, but figuring out what is desirable difficulty and what is not is really important. So I talk to students about that moment of friction where you think, this is hard, maybe AI can do it for me, right? To stop there and think, am I outsourcing something that is important in my development, my skills? Or is it something that's fine, that's not as important? And frankly, even some things that are substantively important are less important than other things that you could be doing, right? So you're always making judgment calls about the priority, about the opportunity cost. But they should be doing that intentionally, right? Which is why I've got the word agency at the bottom there, right? They should be in charge of that. They should be noticing when they are outsourcing and what they are outsourcing to technology. And then these mindsets I have found to be helpful to talk about. Growth mindset, that's one there's a lot of literature on. It just means believing that you can learn new things. A lot of people have come to law school because of a lack of comfort with technology or STEM-related fields. And that can be a turnoff for them when you say, you need to learn all this technology, and they think, I came here because I didn't want to do that. And so you sometimes have to convince people, is this something you can do? And it's a little bit easier if it's Microsoft Word. Although some people, you have to convince them that they don't know Microsoft Word. But there's a good sized group that needs to be convinced that they can do this, right? That even if it looks intimidating when you turn on, you know, the hidden characters in Microsoft Word, that they can figure that out. They can handle it. They can grow. They're smart people. They're in law school. They can do this. Investment. An investment mindset I have found to be important with technology because it often requires an upfront investment and it pays off later, right? If a partner says you need to look through this right now, redact it for whatever information, and then we need to file it like right now. That is not the, the time that you want to be figuring out how to correctly redact something. But maybe you should, right? Because you should recognize this is going to come up again. And I'm going to be in a rush then too. And so helping people understand that when possible, you really should make that upfront investment to learn the right way to do something, because it will save you time later. That can be hard to do. Sometimes the time does not allow it, but it's important to, well, you have to make sure that you are doing it right. Like you can't redact the wrong way and breach your client's confidentiality. But it may be the case that you just don't have time right now for Googling. I guess that's a bad example because you really do have to do it right. But sometimes I've done things manually that I know there's a better way to do. And it happens, but training students to recognize that and to think it is better for me to figure out the right way to do this. And then ownership. This kind of goes to the point I was talking about with Wilson Sonsini, that students have to take ownership over their own careers, over their own skill development, because law firms might not, and I'm not saying anything about Wilson Sonsini in particular, but there are law firms that will, they'll give you the assignments they need done, right? They're not necessarily trying to give you the breadth that you need to develop, or they're outsourcing stuff to AI that you won't be able to advance your skills without that. And so helping them to take charge of their own journey, to understand that they are in charge of their own development, that professors can and will be helpful, partners, other senior attorneys can and will be helpful, but that they're in charge, right? They need to make sure that they are not outsourcing their own skill development, that they are not hindering themselves, right? Hamstringing themselves. And like I said, this all comes back to agency. Being intentional about what you outsource to technology and when, being intentional, making decisions about what you need to put your time into, what you use generative AI to do, and other technology, and not just going along for the ride, wherever the firm takes you, wherever your law school takes you, you need to be in charge. Okay, so operationalizing this, there are a lot of strategies, and I'll talk about more of them later in the later session. But this book is about teaching pedagogy. It has a lot of strategies for how to make learning sticky, right? Not like a bar prep course where you just cram it in, spit it out, and then forget it, right? That's not learning. I liked school. I didn't think bar prep would be that bad. I like learning, but it was terrible because it wasn't learning, right? It was just try and memorize it long enough and then forget it. So thinking about these strategies in effective teaching strategies, and using AI or using technology to help there. So some of the strategies that I've used are simulations, trying to replicate actual legal tasks or legal scenarios, settings, so that it's as similar as possible to what they'll encounter in practice. That makes things more sticky. It also makes it more interesting for them, right? A lot of the things that I teach, like Microsoft Office suite, they're not like really thrilled or excited to be learning because it's not super interesting for a lot of them. I find it interesting, but making it real, making it legal related, turns it from how to turn a heading, how to format a heading, into how to create a brief that looks right, that's not going to get rejected, or that's not going to get them in trouble with the partners. It makes it more real and more memorable. As often as possible, I try to use the technology. It's not always possible for cost reasons. Sometimes we just can't get access. which is a great time to use NSLT. NSLT is downstairs presenting. And when you don't have access to the technology, it's great to have resources like that for training. But I like to get them using it, right? Instead of clicking through, something or just showing them a demo whenever possible, because again, it makes it more memorable. Skip down to watch one, do one. For most of my trainings lately, that's what I've been doing is I'll show them for 20 to 30 minutes, and then the rest of the time, I give them like a list of tasks that they need to do, similar to what I just showed them, but making them actually do it makes it again more sticky, and it helps them, learn things that they can then apply later on. Even if they forget how to do it later, they know that it's possible. They know that there is something that they can look up that will tell them how to do it correctly. I've found it helpful to do some background in history, to explain, why things are the way they are, why the technology works the way that it does. Again, not usually a lot of depth because I don't have a technical background, but the students also, most of them don't have technical backgrounds, and that's not the depth. They don't need a ton of depth in order to meet their ethical obligations. I like the depth, but when you only have so much time, you can't spend it all how you want to. But often it is helpful to talk about why things are the way they are, how the technology works under the surface. For example, that ChatGPT is doing predicting and not searching unless you turn on the search, right? And then spaced repetition. Most of my trainings are, like Microsoft Word, Adobe Acrobat. They're specific to software, but as much as possible, I try and come back to and reuse things. So, the training on Adobe is also going to include working a little bit with Microsoft Word documents so that we're hitting these concepts over and over so that it's not, they hear it once and then, forget it because they haven't used it in a while. Yeah.
You do that sort of spaced repetition. Do you, like for cross-platform finding, are you using one consistent problem throughout, or are you using just different problems every time?
My goal, which I have not quite met, is to use the same fact pattern, the same scenario for all of them. We did that a little bit this last year. We worked with Clio and NetDocs to have training environments, so that they could, they have a matter folder that they can use, in each training, so that that's one where I didn't dedicate a whole session into how a DMS works or how practice management software works. That was one where I chose to try and distribute it across all the sessions. I couldn't always make it fit with this, using the same fact scenario. But as much as possible, I try and, use things multiple times across multiple weeks to make it more memorable. Okay. Any comments or questions at this point before I jump into some more examples? Okay, we've got 15 minutes, right? Is that 40? Okay, so for example, when teaching about generative AI and legal research, I have found it helpful to start with maybe some cases where it fails, where it does not do the job that you want it to do. So this is ChatGPT, legal research question. It cites this correctly formatted, the right reporter, the right abbreviations. This is a family law question. It's even got like a family law kind of name, right? Last name versus last name. That's more common in family law. That's not a real case. This is the case at that location in the reporter. This is a lawnmower injury case. And then in a very Utah way, this is a deceased polygamist green card marriage case. I think I got all that. The man had passed away and he had multiple spouses and there were green cards involved somewhere. And the allegation was that it was a green card marriage, not a bona fide marriage. But neither of those cases answered this research question, though they were interesting. It did not advance, trying to answer the research question. And so this is a good example. There are plenty now of generative AI failing to do what you need it to at this legal task. This is kind of the next step up where it's helpful, but it's got a couple hallucinations in here. It's giving you blue links to existing law, existing sources, but it's still running on an LLM that is just predictive, right? And so it's come up with some cases here that, as far as, well, when I first put this slide on, it was 2024, and so I could safely say that these were not real cases. It may be that we find out that the AI was much smarter than we thought, and it has predicted these real cases. So I need to keep my eye out, is what I'm saying, in the Ninth Circuit. But this is a good example, right? Because they might think, when I use Lexis, it's safe. I can rely on that. This is showing them not quite, right? You still have to do your lawyer job of being in charge of this. This is an example that I talked about in the session earlier on benchmarking, if you were there. This is a bankruptcy law question about a particular provision and how rent is treated in bankruptcy in this particular situation. The Second Circuit has not ruled on this. There are bankruptcy courts and district courts within the Second Circuit that have. And so there were kind of leading cases that I was looking for here. But there's an almost identical provision, 365 D5, that's about personal property instead of rent, but it's otherwise pretty identical language. And so I ran this question through a bunch of different platforms, and mostly they got the answer right? They usually got at least one of the cases that I had found as the leading cases, and gave the correct, it's not settled, but it's leaning this way. But there's this Avianca, funny that it would come up again, but useful this time. The Second Circuit ruled on D5, right? And it went the other way, not the way the cases were leaning on D3. And so this is a really good example of generative AI even doing its job, right? The ones that didn't pick up on this nuance, which would be really helpful for a lawyer if you're trying to argue it should come out this way and this identical provision comes out that way, right? Even if you're arguing the other way, it's important to know about that and be prepared for it. And so I like this example because it shows students that even when it's doing its job, you still have to be in charge. You're the lawyer. You need to, the computer is usually less with generative AI than before, but usually it does what you tell it to, right? And so they still need to be in charge here. I've got some examples here of other ways to integrate AI, like assignments where to help students learn about it and also learn to use it. In this case, they're comparing AI output to something that they already know. So this was for a contracts professor that I helped design this assignment. So on the left here is this fact pattern. It's from the casebook. And so this was after they had already been through that section of the casebook, after they had, in theory, understood the law. And then these questions on the right are also from the casebook, but we had them run it through Paxton AI. And then they compare it to what they learned, right, to see if it matched up, how well it did, if it was, true but incomplete, or misleading, that kind of thing. We've also had assignments where they compare the AI output to other AI tools, or they compare it to authoritative sources. In this case, another contracts one, we had them drafting a provision, an agreement, and then comparing it to practical law. So a human created authoritative source. and to see how well it matched up. Okay, so those are some of the examples. I do have a bunch more examples in my presentation later today, but I want to go back to the big picture questions here. So how do we teach the tech that doesn't exist yet? How do we prepare people for email before it exists? How do we prepare people for the internet before it exists? How do we prepare people for generative AI before it exists? These, again, a work in progress, not definitive answers, but this is what I've come up with so far. But I would love to hear what you all have to think. Many of you teach about technology, and you have deeper technology understanding than I do. But are there thoughts that you've had in response to this question, or strategies that you've come up with on your own when trying to address this problem? Let's focus on the first question.
One of the obstacles that I face, students and I'm sure everyone does, is trying to tap into their curiosity about the tools, rather than saying, I'm really busy, I've got lots of other things going on, I'll just use it as a shortcut. Because the students who get as, oh, this is really interesting, how can I use this to sort of augment my learning, tends to do all of these things that do, and ones that say, my doctoral class is more important, or I've got shortcut, do just that in the middle, they sort of shortcut in the learning. So that doesn't really answer either of these questions.
No, I think it does, and that's exactly the resilience point. I have found curiosity to be such an important part of that. We ran our academies program is after the 1Ls finish exams, they can choose an academy to go to, and they're like practice area focused, appellate litigation, bankruptcy. I did an AI one this year, and so we talked to a bunch of law firms and in-house lawyers about this, and I asked all of them, like, what do you see in lawyers that fail at this, at keeping up, that put their heads in the sand, versus the ones who stay on top of it and take advantage of it? And curiosity and like creative thinking were consistently answers for the attorneys who were able to keep up and adapt well. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Probably second best law school in Utah. And I find our students have the curiosity, but when I'm trying to train the staff, I do not have that curiosity. I tools, you definitely don't want to learn about now some more or something like that. Do you have any example or a suggestion on how to foster that curiosity to learn these new things?
Do they have to put footnotes in as part of their jobs, or?
Often because the professors.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I usually try and find what specifically the benefit would be for them, right? Like, I have to restrain myself when I see people doing things without keyboard shortcuts that I know. It takes them like 10 times as long. But it's kind of annoying to be the person who's like, well, let me show you, and then I learned the shortcuts over a long period of time, and I can't cram them into somebody. But finding like what it solves, where it can save them time, and I try and start with easy stuff to like get the buy-in, right? Don't start with, well, if you download VS Code, so that's, I guess, I don't have a perfect answer, but I try and get really specific about the use case and how they will be applying it, and then focus the training on that. And I think back here, and then we'll come to Doug. Yes.
So I teach a paralegal technologies class. So one of the things I have the students do is evaluate software. I say, I can't know everything you're going to be facing. What firms you're going to, I don't know what organizations, but it's going to be. So I'm trying to pull that into my law school teaching too, focusing on things. How do I educate myself about software? How do I find different options for reviews from users, from experts? kind of evaluating that, what kind of teaching training that's available, all of those different pieces so that no matter what they encounter in the future, they
Yeah.
feel more confident using these tools.
Yeah, yeah, you're not just giving them the result, this is the software you should use, you're teaching them the process that got you there so that they can apply that in the future. Doug, and then Michelle.
So when answering the question from view of you, getting an instructor, so I teach in the evening, but my day job is teaching instructors how to teach about law office tech. And so, you know, I've personally trained 360 people how to do it, and we face that as they don't want to change, they go kicking and screaming into change. And what I've learned, what we do is we have to give them small pieces they can readily deploy. And that way it's less work on their end. The reason they aren't interested is they don't want to change the way they're already functioning. It's more work, they're barely staying afloat with what they've got on their plate. They don't want to do something that really they're not that interested in. And so I have to make them pieces they can deploy without having to think about it and having to change. And then it slowly grows into, they learn that, oh, you know,
Yeah.
there's so many benefits of what I have deployed. Now they're finally picking up the desire to do things and continue on their own.
Yeah, yeah,
And then also wanted to address the other question of how do you teach the tech that doesn't exist yet? But that also, you know, you can't just think of it as how do we teach the tech that doesn't exist, but how do we teach the tech we don't have time to cover? Because, you know, the NSLT with my day job, I'm tracking 640 software programs. There's no way I can shove 640 software programs down the throats of my students. So I'm lucky if I get 12 to 14 in their semester. And so I teach them to understand software is a series of building blocks and steps and processes. And it's really the same processes put together different ways. And once they realize what makes up the program, they understand tech they haven't touched yet.
yeah, they start to see patterns.
They see the pattern, and teaching the pattern is how you teach them the tech that doesn't exist yet.
Yep, they get that variation, the repetition, the feedback. Michelle and then David.
I think both, part of what I was gonna say has been a little bit touched on, but I kind of think about that idea of like preparing for both tech that we can't cover because there's too much, and then also, you know, the future unknown. And I kind of focus on the evaluation part, but not just how to evaluate, but also how to develop their own rubric, because like best means something very different based on like your needs. So how do they figure out how to actually develop a rubric and apply it? And then trying to teach them how to identify like opportunities. So how do you know when you're doing something and you should be like, wait, might there be a better way? Like, how do you train them to kind of think about where those opportunities might exist? And then how do you do that into like a process? And so using like how to do like process mapping for
Yeah,
tasks is something that I teach in like the higher level tech classes so that they can do that more seamless. We
Yeah,
actually map that process. It helps them think about the work they're doing. How do you map out your work? Because when you actually map out what you're doing and stop and think about it, you suddenly see all these opportunities where
Yeah.
maybe you could be doing better, and that creates like internal motivation.
yeah, yeah, it's another pattern recognition thing, seeing like if I'm doing the same rote thing over and over, a computer can probably do that. And then I really like the problem focus, right? Technology is a solution to problems, right? And if you focus just on the solution, you might be in search of a problem, and that's not good.
And I actually had that like on an assignment once where a student said, I mapped out the process, but I don't think my answer involves the technology. And I was like, that's fine.
That's
right?
perfect.
That's totally fine.
Firm's gonna be thrilled.
It was
They don't
like,
have to spend more money.
it's an organization problem
Yeah.
they had to do. And then there were some ways that they could possibly use technology, but they really had a bigger problem that would have impaired their ability to actually use any technology because they didn't have like an underlying structure.
Yeah,
So
and then adoption gets very hard.
yeah.
There's, in response to so your like first prompt your specific question. There's, that old saying that gets attributed to like 100 different people, like comparison is a death of joy. We're talking about curiosity. I sometimes feel like assessment is the death of curiosity. So like, I will chunk my class into different sections where the sort of practical technical skills, I'll often have assessments that are just pass fail. I find that helps provide a little more freedom to be explorative, and then I also engage, make it more of a play. So anything you can do to just say like, this is a psychologically safe space for you to explore and do stuff, because otherwise there's just no room for the curiosity. So I don't know, just make it fun,
Yeah.
make them laugh, make them laugh.
I think the environment is a really important point that I didn't touch on, but like feeling okay making mistakes. That's how technology works. When they build it, when people use it, like you're always making mistakes and iterating and finding a better way. And so helping people feel psychologically safe is a really big part of that.
On the other hand, fear can also stimulate curiosity.
And I use both.
It's been 10 years since I took the MPRE, but does anyone know if technological competence is ever tested on the MPRE? Or to what extent it's covered in professional responsibility classes?
It's not a topic.
But probably not. And law schools have these folks as students for 3 or 4 years, and then they're in practice for 30 or more. What extent, if any, are law schools talking to licensing authorities about continuing this, and encouraging this curiosity once they're in practice? Or demanding that curiosity?
That's not curiosity.
Well, exactly, I know, I'm being facetious, but.
I have proposed courses and been told, we don't want to teach something that could be a CLE.
That what?
That could be a CLE. And I disagree with, it was law practice management. I don't think that's a CLE. I think it's a little bigger than that.
Yeah.
In the back.
As to whether fear is a good motivator, that there also puts people in fight or flight and they are not able to receive information as effectively. So if you do ever want to use fear as a motivator, you have to be really careful about how you do it, because otherwise people will just shut down and they actually don't take any information. Like there's some stuff about metacognition and how that stuff all works, how the brain science stuff, that has made me rethink how I might use like the fear of malpractice for failure to adequately research. No. If I do talk about it, this will help you to not have problems. Not, did you see the one about the person who did XYZ and then they got into trouble because they tried to have, ChatGPT or whatever write a brief and then the person sued them for malpractice? Because because there's stories like that. And if you tell them the story, they're like, oh my God, I can't do that. And they're so focused on I can't do that, that they don't take in the how not to do that.
Yeah, I agree. The example I thought of with fear is the people who feel that they already know Microsoft Word as well as they need to kind of open their eyes, bring them down a peg so that they can be open to learning new things, right? Was there?
Turn in a document and you show them, oh, you didn't turn off your edit history or whatever.
Yes, yeah. I can see, every change you made. Yeah.
Another place fear is coming in is that, and it conflicts a little bit with what you're describing, is that the assessments are a problem right now. And we have seen a stampede back from take-home exams and papers to in-class exams. And we're being, begged for ways to make sure we can shut the AI out of it, including even in-class exams where we would typically have been doing open software open and access to a book or notes or something like that. They want to shut that off too. So we're redesigning systems to accommodate that. But there's a disconnect, right? Because if you're talking about being able to rearrange how you learn to incorporate access to technology, but the instructors are literally terrified that you might use some of it on an exam and they have no way to assess you. So there's coursework and things during the term, but law schools largely operate, not every class, but many classes on a final exam. And that's a collision.
Absolutely. I do some faculty training to try and work it from both ends, right? Because it's not just a student thing.
I was just gonna say, like, I'll just posit that, like, I think the largest threat to education that AI brings is not like this thought of cheating, but like the pitting of students against teachers such that instructors feel like they're having to, I don't know, I just think that that is a corrosive relationship. And I would posit that's like the most dangerous thing about AI is that teachers are now treating their students as enemies who are trying to get away with something. Gonna be quiet.
New York Times article 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I just, yeah, but all these, it's like, it just poisons the relationship.
Don't trust any of them.
And if I can plug my later presentation one more time, we will be talking more about that kind of, about designing assessments and assignments in a way that doesn't require you to try and force people to not use generative AI.
I mean, you say the problem with cheating, maybe it's the problem with the assessment method, what you're talking about. Why is it cheating? You know, is it really cheating, or is it because you're unwilling to change your assessment method? And there's a tool available that they should be learning. And you're trying to stymie them from learning that tool because you're not willing to change your assessment.
Yeah, I've found with faculty, like recognizing desirable difficulties, something they need to do in their material, so that they know what to test, what to assess, instead of just like write a paper, like, you know, being kind of vague about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would fully encourage to keep people to keep pressing on, right? Rethinking assessment along these lines. But if you're going to do this in law school, the first place you need to be pushing is with the licensors. Because a lot of what we end up, a lot of people are designing assessments and what we're trying to get students to be able to do during law school has to do with licensing as well as the practice, right? So, you know, if you can convince the bar exam to allow all these tools on the bar exam, all your professors will fall in line. But that if they won't, then I'm just saying you need to push there as well, not just.
So the bar exam just got completely rethought. Does any of it have anything to do with the tools you're even thinking of? They started rethinking the
The
bar
only
exam
thing is legal
years and years
research
ago. Before it
software,
was even an issue.
which we're gonna have to dumb down to use by the time the test gets employed, because the software can already go beyond and pretty much answer the question on its own in the whole thing that they're trying to test. It does it all for them. So we're gonna have to use a dumbed down version of the software for a test that doesn't hit for what, 2 more years?
26, yeah.
26, so you're another year out, and it's already obsolete. Before,
obsolete.
by the time they announced it, what they're testing was technology's moved past it. The problem we can't face it is technology only has one rule that governs it. That's model rule 1.1 comment 8. You get 2 sentences that you have an ethical duty to be technologically competent. And what does that mean? No one knows, so we can't test it because we have no definition of what competent is and not. And just like Bubba Gump and Shrimp, I can tell you a million ways that you can not be competent using tech, but I can't tell you one checklist that says, if you can do all of this, you are competent.
So, but you're not gonna be you don't have to be competent in tech and competent in the law in the same task.
Oh, no, you do,
Oh, but
I mean, one,
should
look
be,
at
but You
the,
can't test that at the same time.
but that's,
Or at least the instructors don't think so.
well, that's always the question is, well, what tech are we talking about?
Right.
Now it comes down to that word relevant. What is relevant tech? But you look at the cases where, you know, it hinged on the witness's use of Twitter. You know, does an attorney really need to understand Twitter? Everybody would say, no, we don't need to teach that in law school. But in that case, was won or lost on whether or not the attorney actually understood how Twitter functioned, which he didn't, and the case went the wrong way. But it was, you know, it all hinged on that. And so was that attorney now incompetent in tech? Absolutely, because he was trying a case with tech he didn't understand. So that's why we can't define what tech competence is.
Definitions is the crux of this, right? Because, you know, if I need to know criminal law to pass my criminal law exam in law school and the criminal law section of the bar exam, I better know it. And tech or no tech is not the question. The question is,
And
do I know
there's
that law?
established a you know, here's what you have to understand in criminal law, here's all of
Right.
you know. Steps to every, elements to everything that's in criminal law cases.
If only there was a
We
company.
don't have that in tech, we just have the one ring to control them all of you must be
Yes.
competent. And we don't know what it's, you know, the Supreme Court, you know, I'll know it when I see it, but I can't tell you what it is.
Well, let's wrap it up there. Again, you can continue after, but we gotta give people time to get to the next one. I would just boil this all down to maybe just agency here and maybe add on curiosity as kind of the essence of what we're talking about here, putting people in charge of their decisions and their learning and being curious about it. So thank you for coming.
Yeah.